2.5 miles beneath the surface of the North Atlantic, in a darkness that has never once seen the sun, the most famous ship in the world is quietly being eaten alive. She has been down there for over 100 years, and in all that time, she has never stopped changing. Tonight, while you lie here in the warm and the quiet, the wreck of the Titanic is dissolving in the cold, grain by grain, far below the reach of any light. Almost everyone knows how the Titanic sank. Far fewer know what has become of her since. That is where we are going tonight. Not back to the night of the iceberg, but down to the wreck as it is right now, to the rusted bow standing in the silt, to the strange life that has moved into her rooms, to the slow and patient work the deep has been doing on her, in secret, for more than a century. This is the part of her story that almost no one tells. The ship the films remember no longer exists. What waits at the bottom is something else, something stranger and quieter, and in its own way, more honest. We are going to descend to it slowly, the way you have to, and see what the ocean has made of the proudest thing we ever built. If you find this slow, quiet exploration of mystery something you genuinely enjoy, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video and subscribe, letting me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you is always a quiet comfort. There is no rush here, and there is nothing you need to hold on to. This is a slow place, and we will move through it slowly, the way the deep moves through everything. We will drift down past the last of the light. We will stand beside the wreck in the dark and let it show us, in its own quiet time, what 100 years at the bottom of the ocean does to a ship. You do not need to follow every detail. You only need to let yourself sink a little toward the place where she rests. Think of what that means. Right now, while the world above goes about its day, there is a place where it is always night. The cold never changes there. The silence is total. And a great ship is slowly coming apart in the dark, with no one to see it and no sound to mark it. The work simply goes on, as it has every hour of every day for more than 100 years. We are so used to the Titanic as a story with an ending. The iceberg, the lifeboats, the cold water, the dawn. But the story did not end at dawn. It went quiet and sank out of sight, and kept going somewhere we could not follow. Tonight we are going to follow it. We are going down to where the story is still happening, to stand beside it and watch. So settle in, find your comfortable position, dim the lights, take a slow breath. We are leaving the map behind and going down into the dark, to a place that has been waiting a long time for someone to come and look. We carry a picture of this ship, and it gets in the way. It is the ship of the paintings and the films. 4 tall funnels against an evening sky, warm light in 1,000 portholes, a grand staircase of polished oak with a clock at the top, and people in their finest clothes coming down into the warmth. That is the Titanic we remember. That is the Titanic we mourn. That ship has not existed for a very long time. The vessel in our memory is a single week in the spring of 1912, held forever in amber. What waits for us at the bottom only shares its name. We tend to imagine a shipwreck as a moment, a sudden ending frozen in time. We picture the sea as a kind of glass case, keeping the ship exactly as she was on the night she went under. The deep takes that idea from us first. The sea is not a glass case, and it does not preserve. It works, slowly and constantly without rest. It works on everything we give it. and it has had over 100 years to work on her. The funnels are gone. The decks have begun to fall in on themselves. The oak has been eaten away to nothing. Pause for a moment on how strange that is. We have spent more than a century mourning the Titanic of that one night, the ship of the lifeboats and the band and the cold. And all that time, a second Titanic has been sitting at the bottom of the sea, slowly becoming something we have barely looked at. The famous ship belongs to history. This other one belongs to the ocean. And the ocean has been quietly remaking it, year after year, into a thing the people who sailed her would not recognize at all. There is a reason the gap is so hard to hold in the mind. The Titanic is probably the most pictured ship in history. We have her in paintings, steaming proudly under a plume of smoke. We have her rebuilt in glorious detail on film, every lamp and carpet and length of polished rail. We have photographs of her decks crowded with passengers in the spring sun. All of it agrees, a grand and gleaming thing, the height of an age, alive with light and music. And all of it is a portrait of a single week that ended more than 100 years ago. The wreck owes that portrait nothing. It has spent a century becoming something the painters never saw, and the only honest way to meet it is to set the bright picture down and let the dark one take its place. So the ship we are going to see is not the bright one from the photographs. To see her clearly, we have to let that ship go. We carry it with us to the edge of the water, and there we leave it, at the surface where it belongs. What lies below does not need it. The deep has its own version of her now. To reach it, we have to keep going down, past the last of the light, into a cold that never changes and a dark that has no end. To understand what has happened to her, you have to understand where she is. The Titanic rests on the floor of the North Atlantic, 2.5 miles down. That number is hard to feel, so think of it as a journey instead. Imagine you could descend in a small craft, slowly with a single light. For the first 100 feet, the water is still blue, and fish still pass, and the light still means something. This is the thin, warm skin of the ocean, where almost all of its life is found. Then the blue begins to drain away. By 1,000 feet, even the last of it is gone, and you enter the place the old explorers called the Twilight Zone, where the sunlight finally dies, and you are not even close. Below the twilight is the Midnight Zone, where there is no sun at all and never has been. You keep falling, 1,000 feet, 5,000, 10,000. With every meter, the pressure climbs, until by the time you reach her, the weight of the water above is crushing down at over 5,000 pounds on every square inch. It is a force that would fold a steel submarine like wet paper, pressing on every side at once, and it never lets up. The cold here sits just above freezing. There are no waves, no tides, no day and no night. Now and then, on the way down, the dark outside the window flickers with a pale blue spark. It is the light of some small creature making its own glow because there is no other. Then even those grow rare, and the window goes truly black, and you fall the rest of the way through a darkness with nothing in it at all. It helps to understand what that pressure really means. It is not like the wind, which pushes from one direction and then passes. It is a steady hand laid over every inch of you at once, from every side, and it never tires and never eases. A submarine built to withstand the deep is one of the strongest things we make, and even it has a limit. Below that limit, the water does not crack a hull, so much as crush it flat, in less time than it takes to notice. The Titanic crossed that limit long ago on her way down, and the pressure has been holding her ever since. There is a particular strangeness to how unchanging it is. On the surface, time is marked by everything: the light, the seasons, the weather, the tides. Down here, none of that reaches. The water moves, but it moves in slow, deep currents that can take 1,000 years to cross from one ocean to another. The temperature does not shift. The darkness does not lift. A day and a century look exactly the same. When the Titanic came to rest here, she entered a kind of frozen present, a place where nothing happens quickly and nothing ever stops. The pressure that met her on the first night is the same pressure pressing on her now. The cold is the same cold. In 100 years, the only thing that has changed about this place is the ship herself. She grows slowly less, in a room that does not notice, and the floor she rests on is not bare. Look closely in the lights of a submersible, and you will see it falling. A constant, gentle drift of pale flakes, settling out of the blackness above, and coming slowly to rest on everything. The scientists call it marine snow. It is made of the remains of life from the sunlit world far overhead. Tiny dead things sinking for weeks to reach the bottom. It never stops. It has been falling on the Titanic for over 100 years, settling on her decks and her railings, and the open pages of the debris field. It softens every edge, burying her by the smallest of fractions with each passing day. In time, it is the snow that will cover what the bacteria leave behind. The deep does not only take, it also quietly buries its dead. This is the room she lies in, a vast black plain at the bottom of the world, under a weight we were never built to feel, in a cold that never lifts. From the deck where the band once played, it is 2.5 miles straight up to the nearest breath of air. We are about to meet her down here. Let yourself feel, first, just how far she fell. For over 70 years after she sank, no one knew exactly where she was. We had her last radioed position, but it was wrong, off by miles. The ocean had simply closed over her and kept her. For 3 generations, the most famous ship in the world was also one of the most completely lost. Then, in the late summer of 1985, a French and American team came looking again. It was led by a man named Robert Ballard. He had a quiet secret of his own. The search was partly a cover for a classified mission to find 2 lost American submarines on the ocean floor. With only a handful of days left and very little hope, he changed his method. Instead of listening for the hull with sonar, he went looking for the long trail of debris that a sinking ship scatters as it falls. It worked. In the early hours of the 1st of September, the camera sled drifting far below began sending back images. For a while there was only mud. Then something appeared on the screens that did not belong to the seabed. A great curved shape, a boiler, round and unmistakable, sitting alone in the silt. They knew at once. After 73 years, someone had found her. And then a stranger feeling moved through the control room. The clock on the wall read close to 2 in the morning. That was almost exactly the hour, decades before, when the Titanic had slipped beneath the surface and begun her long fall. The people who found her realized they were watching over her at the very moment she had died. The celebration went quiet, and someone suggested a moment of silence for the 1,500 who never left this spot. In the days after she was found, The news raced around the world. But Ballard kept one thing back. He did not reveal the exact location. He had seen what happens to a wreck once its coordinates are public, the way salvagers and souvenir hunters descend on it, and he wanted to give her what protection he could. For a while, the most famous wreck in the world was both found and hidden at the same time. Her resting place a secret held by a handful of people. It did not hold for long. Within a few years, others had reached her, and the taking had begun. But that first visit set a tone that has never quite left. You do not come to the Titanic as you come to a prize. You come the way you come to a grave, quietly, with your head a little bowed, aware that you are a guest in a place that belongs to the dead. Finding her had taken the better part of a century, and many had tried. For decades, expeditions went out into the North Atlantic with the best instruments of their day, dragging sonar across the dark and listening for the shape of a hull. They came back with nothing but the empty grey of the bottom. The sea is very large and very deep, and the wreck was a needle in a field of needles. Part of the trouble was that her own distress signals had given the wrong position. The coordinates the world had trusted for 70 years were off by miles, pointing rescuers and searchers alike at a patch of ocean where she had never come to rest. She had drifted in her long fall away from where she was last seen on the surface. The ocean had not just hidden her, it had moved the map. That is the strange weight of this wreck. It is a discovery and a graveyard at once. The light that found her was the first to touch her hull in over 7 decades, a thin cone of white reaching down into a darkness that had held her since the night she sank. We have been going back ever since, but you do not arrive at the Titanic the way you arrive at sunken treasure. You arrive the way you arrive at a grave. When the first clear images of the bow came back, people expected to see a ship. What they saw was stranger. The shape was there, the great prow, the line of the railing, the open well deck. But the steel was wrong. It was draped in long hanging formations, the colour of rust, like icicles, or like the melted wax of a candle that has burned for a century. They hung from every rail and coated the hull in great rusted curtains, and made the ship look less like metal than like something slowly dissolving. These formations have a name now. They are called rusticles, and they are the most important thing to understand about the Titanic as she is today. They are the proof of a quiet truth that surprises almost everyone who learns it. The wreck is not an object, it is an event. It is not sitting at the bottom of the sea so much as happening there, slowly, every second, including this one. We tend to assume that the deep, being so cold and dark and still, must also be dead, a place where things are simply set aside and forgotten. That assumption is wrong. The deep is not dead, it is patient, which is a very different thing. And down here, in the cold and the black, life found the Titanic long before we did. It did not come to admire her, it came to eat. The iron of her hull is food. To us, a wall of steel is a barrier, solid and permanent. To certain forms of life in the deep, that same wall is a meal that will last for centuries. From the moment she came to rest, they began, and they have not stopped since. Every day the wreck is a little less than it was the day before. Not from storms or currents, but from appetite. There is a strange beauty to it, even so. The rusticles catch the light of a submersible, and glow a deep orange, hanging from the rails in long soft curtains, swaying very slightly in a current you cannot see. For a moment the ruined ship looks almost dressed for something. Then you remember what the orange really is. It is the ship herself, drawn up out of her own steel and held there for a while, on the way to becoming part of the sea. What looks like decoration is the slow work of being undone. There is one more thing to know about the rusticles, and it is the strangest of all. For all the damage they do, they are impossibly delicate. A rusticle that has taken decades to grow will collapse at the lightest touch, dissolving into a cloud of orange dust in seconds. Divers learned early that you cannot handle them, cannot brush against them, cannot even let the wash of a passing submersible come too close. The things that are quietly unmaking the strongest ship of her age are themselves so fragile that a breath would destroy them. There is a lesson hidden in that. The forces that take the great things of the world apart are rarely loud or violent. They're usually patient and small, and so gentle that you would never feel them at work until the work was already done. People once assumed the cold of the deep would keep her almost perfect. By every rule we knew from the surface, the Titanic should have been one of the best preserved ships in history. They were wrong, and the way they were wrong taught us something new. The cold does slow ordinary rust, but it does not stop life, and life had its own way of taking the iron, one that needed no warmth and no light at all. Look closely at a rusticle, and you are not looking at rust in the ordinary sense. You are looking at a living structure, a colony, a city of a kind, built by some of the smallest creatures on Earth. A rusticle is the work of bacteria, not one kind, but many, living together in their billions inside each hanging spire. To them the Titanic was an arrival, a mountain of iron dropped suddenly into a world where iron is rare, and they moved in and began to feed. The way they feed is patient and strange. They draw the iron out of the steel and use it for energy, in a slow chemical fire that gives off no heat and no light. As they work, they bind the rust into delicate shapes. Each rusticle grows downward, the way an icicle grows, but it is built of corrosion and living cells instead of frozen water. Inside, it is threaded with tiny channels, like the veins of a leaf. Water moves through them, feeding the colony deep within. The whole thing breathes. One of the bacteria pulled from these spires turned out to be new to science, a species that lived on the iron of the wreck and had never been named. They called it Halomonas Titanicae, after the ship that had become its home. A disaster that took 1,500 lives has given its name to a form of life we only found by going down to look at her hull. And the work is faster than it sounds. The colonies are thought to draw hundreds of pounds of iron from the wreck every single day, which across a year becomes many tons. This is why the people who know her best speak in decades, not centuries, when they talk about how long she has left. The rusticles do not rest, they do not pause for winter, because there is no winter here. They simply feed hour after hour, turning the largest ship of her age into dust and carrying it quietly away. It helps to think of a single rusticle as a small world with its own society. Inside, many different kinds of bacteria live side by side, each with its own task. Some draw the iron out of the steel. Some build the rusted structure that holds the whole thing together. Some live on the waste the others leave behind. It is not a clump of decay. It is a community, as organized in its way as a coral reef. And the Titanic without ever meaning to, became its foundation. An entire living system now exists that did not exist before she fell. It is built on her ruin, fed by her iron, named after her loss. She set out to cross an ocean. Instead, she became the ground beneath her wool that needed somewhere to begin. It helps to be precise about what eaten really means here, because it is gentler and stranger than it sounds. The bacteria do not bite or tear. They cannot. What they do is chemical and almost silent. They pull individual atoms of iron out of the steel and use the tiny spark of energy that releases to live, the way we pull energy from food and air. Atom by atom, the hull passes through their bodies and out again as rust. The rust drifts down and settles into the sediment and is gone. There is no violence in it anywhere. There is only appetite and time and the patience of something that has all the time in the world. The strongest ship of her age is not being destroyed. She is being slowly digested by the sea. So when you picture the wreck now, do not picture stillness. Picture a slow, silent feeding that never ends. A great iron body, 2.5 miles down, being taken apart and carried off by creatures too small to see. It is not destruction exactly, it is digestion. The Titanic is being eaten by the sea, one atom at a time, and turned into something new. Of the two great pieces of her, the bow is the one that still remembers it was a ship. When she broke apart at the surface, the front half filled and sank first. It went down heavy and nose first, planting itself into the seabed like a blade. It is buried deep in the mud, as much as 50 feet of it driven out of sight, but what stands above the silt is unmistakable. Approach it in a submersible, and it does not look like wreckage. It looks like a ship, waiting in the dark. This is the image most of us hold of the wreck, the prow rising out of the gloom, the two great anchors still in their places, the rail along the edge of the forecastle, where a century ago 2 passengers stood in the cold wind and felt the ship moving under them. That rail is still there, thinned and softened by the rusticles, but holding its line. You can follow it with your eyes exactly as they once followed it with their hands. Further along you reach the bridge, where the officers stood and the wheel was turned too late to swing away from the ice. The wooden wheelhouse is long gone, but the bronze stand that held the ship's wheel still rises from the deck, green with age, pointing at nothing. Of everything on the wreck, that small stand may be the most haunting. It marks the exact spot where the most famous ship in the world was steered toward the iceberg, and it is still standing there, patient and upright, holding its post long after everyone who gave it orders has gone. There is more of the bow to walk than people expect. Forward of the bridge lies the long open deck, where the cargo cranes still lean at their angles, and the great anchor chains run away into the dark, each link as thick as a man's arm. Set into the deck are the open hatches of the cargo holds, black squares that drop into a deeper black. The lights of a submersible reach the rim of each opening and then stop. Beyond that is darkness no one has properly seen. Rooms full of water and silence that have stayed sealed since the night she sank, keeping their own quiet counsel in the cold. There is one place on the bow that carries more weight than any other. Near the front, the forward mast once rose from the deck. At the top of it sat the crow's nest, where a lookout kept watch through the freezing night. It was from there that a man rang the bell 3 times and lifted a telephone to say the words, that would echo down the next century. Iceberg, right ahead. The mast has fallen now. It lies collapsed along the deck. But the place where it stood is still there. You can find it in the lights of a submersible. And you can stand in your mind beside the man who climbed it, looking out into the same dark, not yet knowing what the dark held. What strikes the divers most is not the damage, it is the recognition. The bow is decayed, but it has not been reduced to an anonymous heap. It is still clearly a ship. The shape that thousands of people once walked across is a shape you can still walk across with your eyes. The bow does not feel dead when you reach it. It feels asleep. It feels like it is holding its breath in the dark, waiting for a morning that is never going to come, while all the while it sinks a little deeper into the mud and gives itself slowly back. If the bow still looks like a ship, the stern looks like what really happened. About 2,000 feet away across the seabed lies the other half of the Titanic, and the two pieces are nowhere near each other. The bow was already flooded when it sank and went down smoothly in something close to balance. The stern went down still full of trapped air. As it dropped, the pressure climbed far faster than that air could escape, and deck by deck the trapped pockets gave way. It was crushed from outside and blown apart from within at the same time, folding and bursting as it fell through the dark. By the time it struck the bottom, it was no longer a ship. It was a ruin. Where the bow rests with a kind of awful dignity, the stern lies in chaos. The decks have pancaked down onto one another. Sheets of steel are peeled back and twisted, and machinery that belonged deep inside the ship lies flung across the silt. For years it confused the people studying it, who struggled to tell which piece had even been which. You would think you were looking at the aftermath of an explosion, and you would not be far wrong. This is the part of the wreck that holds the violence of the night. The stern was where most of the people still aboard had gathered in the final minutes, crowded toward the rising end as the bow went under. It was the last part of the ship above the water, and the last thing many of them ever stood upon, and it was destroyed more completely than any other part of her. Between the propellers and the rest of the stern lies a stretch that is almost impossible to read. The hull has been torn open and folded back on itself. Decks have collapsed into a single crushed mass. Machinery that once sat deep inside the ship now lies exposed and tangled, ripped from its mountings and thrown across the silt. Explorers moving their lamps across it slowly often cannot tell what they are looking at, because the shapes have lost their names. This is where the ship stops being a ship at all and becomes pure aftermath. The bow lets you imagine her as she was. The stern in this ruined middle lets you imagine nothing but the violence of the fall that put it here, the speed of it, the dark it fell through. In a way, the Titanic died twice. The bow died quietly, sliding under the surface and falling in something close to grace, coming to rest almost intact. The stern died hard. It stayed at the surface a few minutes longer, lifting high into the night, while hundreds clung to it. Then it went down fighting, breaking, and imploding the whole way to the bottom. The two halves tell two different stories of the same night. One is the story we like to tell, slow and sorrowful and strangely beautiful. The other is the truth underneath it, sudden and violent and merciless. The wreck holds both. The bow lets us mourn her. The stern refuses to let us forget what actually happened in the cold and the dark to the ship and to the people who could not get off her in time. There is something hard in that. The place where the most life clustered at the end is the place the sea treated with the least mercy. One part of it still holds its grandeur, far at the back. There the great bronze propellers stand half buried in the silt, each one taller than a house. The bronze does not rust the way iron does, so the blades are still smooth and curved, exactly as they were when they drove her across the Atlantic. They turned for less than 5 days. They have been still for over 100 years. Between the two great pieces of the ship lies what the experts call the debris field. As the two halves dropped through 2.5 miles of water, everything that was not fixed down spilled out of her and drifted to the bottom. The fall took perhaps a quarter of an hour, and in that time, the contents of a small floating city rained slowly onto the ocean floor. To travel from the bow to the stern, you pass over all of it. And it is here, more than in the hull itself, that the wreck becomes unbearably human. The first thing you notice is the coal, black lumps of it scattered across the pale silt, like a dark snow that never melted. Thousands of tons of it spilled from her bunkers, the fuel meant to carry her to New York, lying instead in the dark forever. Then you begin to see the rest, and the rest is strange, because of what survived and what did not. Anything made of wood or cloth or leather is long gone, but fired clay and porcelain and glass have endured almost untouched. So the debris field is scattered with dishes, stacks of plates still standing upright in rows, held in the shape of a cupboard that rotted away around them, wine bottles, many still corked, a porcelain doll's head, smooth and pale, its painted face still looking up, a silver platter, a chamber pot, a child's marble. None of it is treasure. All of it is priceless, in the only way that matters, because each object is the edge of a life. Some of the sights here are strange because they are so orderly. There are places where plates still stand in neat stacks, dozens of them in a row, holding the exact shape of the wooden dresser that rotted away around them long ago. Nearby lies one of the ship's great whistles, which once sounded across the harbour, and a bench from the deck, its iron frame waiting as if for someone to sit. None of it was arranged. It simply fell and settled, and was held in place by the stillness of the deep. A stack of dinner plates on the floor of the ocean says something a stack of plates on a shelf never could. Scattered through all of it are the smaller, stranger survivors. A bronze cherub that once stood at the foot of the grand staircase, now lying on its side in the mud. The ornate frame of a window, the glass long gone. A set of bed springs, the mattress they held dissolved away. An ornate hand mirror, the glass somehow still intact. None of these things is valuable in the way treasure is valuable. They are the ordinary furniture of human life, the contents of cabins and corridors and dining rooms. They lie spilled across the floor of the abyss, lit once every few years by a passing lamp. To see them lying there is to understand, in a way no number ever delivers, that this was not a ship. It was a town, and the town went down with everyone in it. Some of the objects carry a strange fame of their own. The ship's bell, which once rang out across her decks, has been brought up into the light. So has the telegraph, the brass instrument the officers used to send their orders down to the engine room, frozen now at the settings of that final night. And there is the safe, raised with great ceremony and opened on live television, in the hope of treasure. Inside there was only ruined paper and a little waterlogged jewellery, the sea having quietly dissolved most of what it held. That, in its way, is the Titanic's whole lesson in miniature. We go down expecting gold. We come back with something quieter and harder to hold. A handful of ordinary things, soaked in time, that mean far more than any treasure, because of who they belong to and what they survived. Each one belonged to someone. Each one was packed and carried aboard and set down in a cabin by a person who expected to pick it up again on the other side of the ocean. They never did, and the objects stayed and settled and are waiting still. To cross the debris field is to read a single night laid out across the seabed. It does not describe the disaster in numbers. It describes it in teacups, and somehow the teacups say it more clearly than any number ever could. Some of these objects have been brought up and studied, and when they are, something quiet and remarkable happens. They begin to give back the names of the people they belong to. One small leather bag, recovered from the silt, belonged to a man named Adolf Saalfeld, a chemist traveling to America to sell perfume. The bag was full of glass vials, his samples, the scents he hoped to build a business on in a new country. When it was opened in a laboratory, the vials were still there. A few of them, impossibly, still carried their scent. For a moment, in that room, you could smell the cargo of the Titanic. You could smell what one hopeful man had carried toward a future he never reached. That is what the objects do. They collapse the distance. The figure of 1,500 dead is too large to feel. But a man's perfume samples are not a number. They are a person. The people who study the wreck have spent decades matching watches and combs and spectacles to the passenger lists until an item in the silt becomes a named human being again. It is slow and reverent work, more like a memorial than a salvage, and there is a strange mercy in what the sea chose to keep, because there is a question people are afraid to ask about the wreck. Where are the people? 1,500 died here, yet in over 100 years of photographs, there are no human remains. None. The answer is in the chemistry of the deep. The Titanic lies below the depth at which the cold water slowly dissolves the calcium that bone is made of. The bodies were taken, the soft parts quickly, and the bones over time, dissolved into the very water that surrounds the wreck. The sea did not bury the dead of the Titanic. It absorbed them. There is a particular weight to the belongings of those who had the least. The wealthy of the Titanic are well recorded, their names and cabins and fates set down in detail. But the silt also holds the things of people history barely noticed: a clay pipe, a pocket knife, a handful of small coins, a plain comb. These belong to travelers in the lowest decks, families crossing the ocean to begin again in a new country, carrying everything they owned in a single case. For many of them, a worn object in the dark is the only sign they left in the world at all. The deep does not sort the dead by class. It took the grand staircase and the steerage berths with the same patience. On the seabed, a rich man's watch and a poor man's pipe lie in the same cold mud. Equal at last, each one saying the same quiet thing. Someone was here, but it left their shoes. Leather once tanned is treated with chemicals the deep-sea organisms will not touch, and so while the bodies vanished, the shoes did not. Across the debris field, the explorers find them in pairs. A left shoe and a right shoe lying side by side, a small careful distance apart. exactly as they would sit if someone were still wearing them. A pair of shoes in that position means a body came to rest on that spot and was slowly taken, while the leather stayed where the feet had been. The boots of a man, the buttoned shoes of a woman, and more than once, the tiny shoes of a child. By a quiet agreement, almost everyone who works at the wreck leaves them exactly where they lie. They are the truest headstones the deep has ever kept. We have been speaking of the wreck as a place of ending, but the deep does not see it that way. To the life of the abyss, the Titanic is not a tomb, it is an oasis. To understand why, you have to understand how empty the deep sea floor really is. The plain that surrounds the wreck is one of the most barren places on the planet. A flat desert of soft pale mud stretching away in every direction. Food is scarce, falling slowly from far above. There is little to stand on, little to hide in, and little to eat. And then, into the middle of that desert, a great structure arrived. The wreck gave the deep two things it almost never has: shelter, a vast complex of walls and overhangs in a world that is otherwise flat, and hard ground, solid surfaces to cling to, where before there was only mud. To the animals of the abyss, the ship is the only high ground for miles. It is a reef, and so they have come to live on her. The railings of the bow are crowded with pale anemones, their tendrils open to the dark water, waiting for whatever drifts past. Delicate corals have taken hold along the decks. Armies of small crabs and squat lobsters pick their way through the rust. Strange fish with heavy heads and long whip-like tails drift through the corridors. Now and then something larger passes, a pale eel or the slow shape of a deep-sea shark, or an octopus folding itself through a gap in the plating. The biologists who study the wreck have come to see it as something more than a ruin. They see it as an island. The deep ocean is scattered with these hard places: a sunken ship, a fallen whale, an outcrop of rock. The life of the abyss uses them like stepping stones across a vast and empty plain. Larvae drift in from the dark and take hold. Generations are born and die on her decks. The same iron that failed 1,500 people has become the foundation of a thriving little world, and the deep built it without any cruelty and without any kindness, simply because the ship was there. Stand with that for a moment, because it is one of the strangest things the deep has to teach. The anemones that bloom along the railings are blooming where passengers once leaned to watch the sea. The crabs raise their young in what were once cabins. The fish drift through dining rooms where a band once played. To them, none of it carries any meaning at all. There is no tragedy here, and no memorial, only good hard ground in a hungry world. More life now clings to this single wreck than to anything for miles in any direction. Death and life are not opposites in this place. They are the same slow process, turning over and over in the dark, and the ship is simply the ground on which it happens. There is something almost unbearable in this, and something hopeful too. The Titanic was the scene of one of the most famous deaths in history, and it has become, in the slow patience of the deep, one of the richest gardens of life for miles around. The same walls that mark a grave are the walls that shelter 1,000 living things. We come down expecting a dead place, and find instead that life has quietly moved in and made the ruin its home. To the anemones it was never a tragedy. It was only ever an opportunity, a sudden gift of shelter and stone in a hungry and open world. The ship is being eaten, yes, but it is also being inhabited. It is dying and teeming at once. And in the deep, those are the same things seen from two sides. Step inside her, and the story changes again, because the inside of the Titanic is disappearing faster than the outside. The most famous room on the ship was the grand staircase, a sweeping double stairway of polished oak beneath a great glass dome, with a carved clock at its head. It was the heart of the ship, and it is gone. When the explorers first sent cameras down into the opening where it had been, they found only a deep, empty shaft. The wood had been entirely consumed, and the staircase had dissolved into the sea, leaving a hollow well running down through the decks. There is a grim irony in that absence. Because the staircase rotted away so completely, it left a clear opening straight down into the body of the ship, and that opening became the way in. The small robots that explore her interior descend through the ghost of the grand staircase, into rooms no living eye had seen in generations. What they find is a world in collapse, scattered with small miracles. In some chambers, the chandeliers are still hanging, crystal and bronze fixtures dangling from ceilings that are themselves rotting away, swaying very slightly in the slow current. The robots' lamps catch them, and for a moment they glitter, exactly as they were meant to. Deeper in, the mosaic floor of the Turkish bath still holds its pattern, looking almost new. One room in particular became famous among those who study her interior. The cooling room of the Turkish bath, deep inside the ship, stayed almost perfectly intact for decades after the sinking. The inlaid tiles, the carved woodwork, the elegant lamps, all of it held its shape in the dark, looking ready for use as if it were a pocket of 1912 sealed in the cold. People who saw the images described it as a room out of time. But even it has begun to give way now. The ceilings are failing, the walls are coming down. The space that resisted the deep, longer than almost any other, is finally being taken like all the rest. What makes the inside so haunting is how quickly it is going. The people who watch the wreck across the decades have learned to brace themselves before each visit, the way you brace before seeing someone who is very ill. A wall that stood last time is open this time. A room that was photographed in detail a few years ago has folded in on itself and sealed. The deep is closing her interior one space at a time, drawing the curtains on cabin after cabin. Each one holds its own small history. Each one goes dark for good. We tend to think of the wreck as a fixed thing waiting patiently for us. It is not waiting, it is leaving slowly while we watch. Every set of images we bring back is already a picture of a ship that no longer quite exists. But these are pockets, and they are closing. Floors have fallen onto the floors beneath them. Walls have folded. Whole sections of the upper decks have caved inward, sealing off rooms that were photographed only years ago. And the pace is quickening. A railing that stood on one expedition lies flat on the next. The crow's nest, visible in the earliest dives, is simply gone. The captain's quarters, with a white bathtub that became one of the most haunting sights on the ship, collapsed into the slumping ruin after surviving more than 100 years. Each time we return, there is a little less of her. To move through her interior now is to move through a house at the very end of its life. It is falling slowly around you, in a silence so complete you could almost believe nothing was happening at all. Reaching the Titanic is one of the hardest things a human being can do. and from the moment she was found, people have been determined to do it. The man who discovered her, Robert Ballard, believed the wreck should be treated as a memorial. He took nothing. Instead, he left a small plaque on the stern in memory of those who died, and asked the world to let her rest. It was a noble idea, and it did not entirely hold. To stand on her deck, a person has to be sealed inside a small sphere of metal and lowered for 2.5 hours through the black water. The craft falls into a cold that seeps through the hull, into a darkness no light has ever reached, while the pressure outside climbs toward a force that would crush the sphere in an instant if it failed. There is nothing to see on the way down, just the long fall, and the cold, and the knowledge of how far you are from the surface. The Russian Mir submersibles made many of the most important dives. The filmmaker James Cameron returned again and again, far more often than any film could require, until by his own account it had stopped being about the movie and become about the ship herself. What draws them is hard to put into words, but they all seem to feel it. It is the chance to be present at the most famous absence in the world, to put your face to a small window and see, with your own eyes, the railing where the passengers stood. People who have done it speak of reverence and of sadness and of how the ship seems somehow aware of them in the dark. And then comes the long climb back. The ascent takes as long as the descent, 2.5 more hours of rising through the same black water, with the cold settled deep into the small craft. There is time on the way up to feel the weight of where you have just been. People who have made the trip rarely describe it as an adventure. They describe it as something closer to grief and to awe. They come back quiet, carrying the same thought. It is still down there. Not a story, not a film, but a real thing. In the real dark, far beneath the place where the rest of us live. And every one of them has had to leave again. That is the bargain the deep offers, and it does not bend. You may visit, but you may not stay. You fall for hours into her world. You spend a little time beside her in the cold and the dark, and then you must rise back toward the light and the air, leaving her exactly as you found her. She does not come up with you. In 100 years, she has had only a handful of human visitors at a time, for a few hours each, across a few short decades. The rest of the time she is alone, in the dark, keeping her own slow company at the bottom of the world. The surface forgets, for long stretches, that she is even down there. But the deep does not distinguish between the ship and the people who come to see her. To it, they are all just objects, lowered into a place that was never made for them. In the summer of 2023, the world was reminded of this in the hardest way. A small submersible set out to carry a group of people down to the wreck, and it never arrived. Under the crushing weight of the deep, it failed, and all 5 aboard were lost in an instant. Among them was a man who had been to the Titanic more times than almost anyone alive. The deep he knew so well did not spare him for knowing it. The wreck took 1,500 on the night she sank. More than a century later, in the same dark water, she was part of the loss of 5 more. Reaching her is not routine. It never has been. It still asks everything of the people who try. Not everyone agreed to leave her untouched. From the beginning, there were 2 visions of the wreck. One saw a grave to be honored and left alone. The other saw a collection to be recovered and studied and shown to the world. A company won the legal right to recover objects from the site, and over many expeditions it has brought up thousands of them. Dishes and jewelry and perfume vials. Even a great slab of the hull, weighing many tons, was raised and lifted back into the world of air and light. There is a real argument for this. The objects kept in the dark would eventually be lost. The ship is dissolving, and the debris field will not last forever. To raise an item and conserve it is, in one way, to rescue a piece of the story before the deep erases it. And the exhibitions let ordinary people stand face to face with the reality of the Titanic as a real thing made of real objects that belong to real people. But the wreck is also a grave. 1,500 died there, and to raise dishes from that water is, to many, no different from taking objects from any other grave. There is no clean answer. The same vial, lit and labelled in a museum case, is both a small miracle of preservation and a thing lifted out of a grave so that strangers might pay to look at it. The largest thing ever taken from her has a story of its own. It is a section of the hull, a slab of riveted steel weighing many tons, with portholes still set into it. They call it the big piece. It took more than one attempt to raise it. The first try failed, and the steel fell back into the deep, and it was yours before it finally broke the surface. Today it stands in an exhibition, a wall of the Titanic you can walk up to and stand beside, close enough to count the rivets. The courts that have wrestled with all this settled on one firm rule. The recovered objects must be kept together as a single collection and never sold off piece by piece. They mean something only as a whole. Break the collection apart, scatter the cups and the coins to private buyers, and the memory breaks with them. And there is one more thing we leave behind. Wherever we go in the deep, we leave a little of ourselves. Around the wreck, on the silt, lie things that did not come from the ship. Weights dropped by submersibles, equipment lost in the dark, plaques laid in tribute, and the ordinary refuse of the surface world has begun to reach even here, where plastic and food wrappers have been found in the trenches far below her. We tend to think of the deep ocean as the one place we cannot spoil, too vast and too far and too dark. But the Titanic teaches the opposite. If we can reach a thing, we can mark it, and we can now reach almost everything. The hardest place in the world to visit still ended up with our fingerprints on it. Even reverence leaves a mark. There is no way to visit the dead without disturbing the silt. All of this points to a single fact, and it is one we find hard to accept. The Titanic is running out of time. She has been on the seabed for over 100 years. She will not be there in any recognizable form for another 100. The bacteria are too patient and too many, and the collapse is too far along. Some researchers believe the hull could lose its structure within a few decades. There is debate about the exact pace. There is none about the direction. We are among the last people who will ever see the Titanic as a ship. In time, the bow that still rises so unmistakably from the silt will sag and flatten and merge with the seabed. It helps to be clear about what gone will actually mean. The Titanic will not vanish, because matter does not vanish. The iron of the hull will simply finish its long passage through the bodies of the bacteria and settle into the sediment as a rich rust-colored stain on the floor. The shape of a ship will become a low mound, and then a smear, and then a patch of seabed, slightly different in color from the silt around it. The bronze and the porcelain and the glass will outlast the rest. Long after the ship herself is gone, a teacup will still sit in the dark, and a pair of shoes will still mark a grave. And yet this is not really destruction. The Titanic was made of iron, and iron comes from the earth. For a few short years it held a shape that human hands had given it. Ever since, the sea has been doing something that only looks like ruin. It has been returning the iron to the world it came from. The bacteria are not her enemies. They are the path by which she rejoins the ocean. Nothing is being lost. Everything is being moved. It is striking to see how that returning actually works, because the deep has a way of doing it. When a great whale dies and sinks, its body does not simply rot away. First the scavengers come, the hagfish and sharks and crabs, and they strip it down over months. Then the worms and the smaller creatures move into work through what is left. At last the bare bones become home to bacteria that feed on them for years, supporting strange communities found nowhere else. A single dead whale can hold life on the seabed for half a century before it finally dissolves. The Titanic is the same process on a vast and slow scale, a body of iron instead of flesh, running not over decades but over centuries. She is not being destroyed. She is being eaten down, layer by layer, into the foundation of something else. The deep does this to everything that falls into it, and the Titanic is no exception. We will mourn her when she is gone, and that is right and human. But the deep will not mourn. To the deep, it is simple. A little iron arrived, stayed a while, and is now being put back where iron belongs. The sea gives, and the sea takes back, and in the taking back, it only ever makes room for whatever comes next. We began at the surface with the bright ship of our memory, and we agreed to leave it behind. Now at the end, we are 2.5 miles down, in the cold and the permanent dark, beside the real thing, the rusted bow rising out of the silt, the shoes lying in their pairs, the chandeliers still hanging in the flooded rooms, the slow rain of iron drifting down from the spires of living rust. This is the Titanic as she truly is tonight, while you lie here in the warm and the quiet, far above her. And perhaps now she looks a little different than she did when we started. A living, dissolving, changing thing. A place where tragedy and life and time are all happening at once, slowly, in the dark, whether anyone is watching or not. There is a question worth asking at the end of a descent like this. Why does it matter that she is down there at all? We have her story, her films, her artifacts in their museum cases. Why do we need the wreck itself, sinking ever deeper into the mud, where almost no one will ever see it? Perhaps because we need there to be a place like this. In a world we have mapped and lit and filled with noise, we need to know that there is still a thing as large as the Titanic resting somewhere we can barely reach, kept by a sea that answers to no one, changing on a clock that does not care about us at all. We need reminding that not everything is ours to keep. Maybe that is the gift hidden inside the loss. The Titanic does not need us to save her. She does not need us to raise her or map her or hold her in place against the slow pull of the deep. She is already where she belongs, in the keeping of the ocean, and the ocean knows exactly what it is doing. There is a strange comfort in that, once you let it settle. The thing we could not save is not really being destroyed. It is only being taken home. We will mourn her when she finally goes, and we should. But there is something worth carrying away from down here, something the deep seems to be saying very quietly to anyone willing to listen. Nothing we build is ours to keep forever. The grandest thing of its age, the unsinkable ship, has spent 100 years being patiently unmade by creatures too small to see. It has gone on with or without our permission, in a place we can barely reach. There is grief in that, but there is also a strange and steadying peace. The world is older and deeper than we are. It was here long before us, and it will go on long after. It keeps its own slow time, dreaming its own cold dreams, in the dark. She is down there now as you drift towards sleep. The lights of the last submersible left her long ago, and there is no one beside her tonight. There is only the cold, and the weight of the water, and the small, ceaseless work of the things that are taking her home. The rust grows, the iron falls, the shoes keep their quiet watch, and the most famous ship in the world rests where she fell, 2.5 miles beneath the waves, giving herself slowly back to the sea that has been waiting for her all along. Rest well, the deep is keeping her, and it will go on keeping her, patiently, long after the last of us has gone to sleep for good.